Welcome back. You know when someone describes a dream to you, and for some reason you're incredibly interested in your own dreams, you wish you could remember more of them, but when it's someone else's dream, it just sounds so weird that you're not interested at all. You don't care. Even when they go, and you were in it, you were in my dream. You were having cocktails with Elvis while Marlon Brando went on a hunting expedition with Lady Gaga. You don't care. You don't care. There's a little bit of that going on in the Howling too, where no matter how much I talk about it, which isn't going to be too much because again, I can, you won't get a tenth of a thousandth of a millionth, which is a billionth if you count it up. Thank you very much. Then you won't get a billionth of how strange and odd this film actually is unless you've seen it. So, once again, we hurl ourselves into the obscure corners of Christopher Lee's filmography. Remember, this isn't looking particularly at films where he had a big role. Some of them he's only got a cameo in, but it's just to show the length and breadth of the strange things he would do in the name of getting work. So, we are, of course, going to start with The Howling 2 because, like a dream, I feel like if I don't start with it, it'll leave my head within a couple of minutes. What was it called again? Yeah, so The Howling 2, Your Sister's a Werewolf. And believe me, you won't forget that subtitle of it, even though it doesn't appear on this. You won't forget that quickly because it's said about 300 times during the film. Plot. Actually, there's not a lot of plot to get in the way of the mayhem. Um, the young woman from the previous film, a very tenuous link to the previous film, um, were at her funeral after being turned into a werewolf, and her brother and her friend are there who weren't in the previous film, and they're approached by Christopher Lee as a werewolf hunter, essentially, or vaguely fighting the forces of evil. Doesn't really get defined too much until later in the film, and told we need to do this and do that because turns out the Queen of the Werewolves is coming and she's going to reign for a million years, blah 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 blah, unless we go to her lair. So kill your sister. We'll go to her lair over in Transylvania. Chris has probably got a few discount tickets to use in Transylvania, for hotels and cafes and things. He knows a few people in Transylvania. Transylvania. Werewolves, remember. So we'll go to Transylvania, take care of her, and then job's a good one. That's really it for the plot. Nothing else happens in the film. Actually, a lot happens in the film, but not outside the width of that plot outline, really. So it's not worth going into in terms of what it does to the plot. That's the story of the film. I've just told you. However, the weirdness of this film cannot possibly be explained in words. Dialogue like, "Look, a dwarf. Should we follow him?" Well, I don't see why not. Is male genius. Uh, Editing like star swipes that only happen once in the whole film. Then the next one will be a dissolve. Then the next one will be a side swipe where half the screen dissolves to one side and half to the other side. Um, just all over the place editing throughout the film. A sporadic use of titles on screen. So sometimes it will say the next morning, even though we've watched films before. So we know that if we see a couple enjoying themselves and then saying goodnight to each other, and then we see daylight and then fully clothed again, we know it's the next day. It comes up saying the next morning, even though that doesn't have any impact on the plot. We don't need it to be the next morning for the story to continue. They just decide sometimes to remind you that time is a thing. The musical score is all over the place, including one of the weirdest songs, one of the weirdest theme tunes for a film ever, which the composer of said theme tune appears in the film with a made-up band, and when asked to come up with some more ideas on the musical score, said, "Why don't we just use the song I've written over and over and over again?" And the director, Philip Mora, said, "Yep, sounds like a good idea to promote you and you alone. We should do that." Philip Mora directed Christopher in Return of Captain Invincible, a film which I have a video on previously, 3 years ago, as I looked it up yesterday. 3 years in the blink of an eye, an absolute favourite of mine. Everything about this film screams that it should be an Italian film, from terrible dubbing to bizarre plotting to dream logic, but it isn't. It's an Australian film. It's nothing like the Howling, the Joe Dante classic, but it's entirely its own thing. Sybil Danning, as we see from the front cover here, is the queen of the werewolves, Stilgar. And when Stilgar comes to life from being a little old lady, she drinks some blood. Again, Transylvania vampire. They don't seem to know what kind of genre they're in here. They're hedging their bets. I mean, they've literally got Dracula in the bloody picture. Drinking the blood gets her back to being young, blah 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 blah. And they have werewolf orgies, and she's watching a couple of werewolves getting it on in one of the most uncomfortable scenes you'll ever see in a film. And Sybil Danning just decides to get her tits out. Just decides to do it because she realizes she's Sybil Danning. And then famously, for fans of this film, over the end credits, that scene of her just for no reason getting her tits out is repeated 17 times, exactly 17, because Sybil Danning complained to the producers at the premiere, well, that just makes me look like I was only hired for my tits, because they had shown it over the whole credits, which was about 40 times, and they said, okay, we can see what you mean. How about we only do 17? And Sybil Danning said, okay, that lets me retain my dignity. Nothing about this makes sense. The werewolf costumes themselves are atrocious. A lot of the werewolf attacks have to be little puppets and things because the costumes that were sent were reuses for the TV show version of Planet of the Apes. So Christopher Lee decided to improvise a line on set about simian life forms being part of the in-between states of lichens and humans because, he was so offended at the idea that all of a sudden there were apes on set and he has to pretend they're werewolves that he puts in an explanation. The poor actors that are wearing these awful furry suits having to simulate sex scenes. I mean, there's a werewolf orgy in here. They hired extras to do it, but nobody told them what simulated sex was. And loads of the extras just started having sex for real on the floor. It was filmed in then Czechoslovakia under a communist regime, and all sorts of difficulties ensued from that. Yeah, just a bizarre, bizarre film. In terms of Christopher Lee's involvement, it's one of the biggest parts that we've got in playing this month, but I can't recommend it based on his performance. I can only recommend the film for people who like bad B movies. But in terms of his performance, he's embarrassed. You can tell he's fully aware that this is a piece of crap, and he wishes he wasn't in it so much. He wishes he just had that little cameo or something, but no, he's in pretty much the whole thing. Red Brown returns from Captain America, um, and that we reviewed on episode one, and he's even worse here. He's atrocious. He's the brother who's like going with Christopher Lee to avenge his sister's immortal spirit. Blah 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 blah. I mean, Christopher invites them to go. No, he doesn't. Excuse me. They say, "Where are you going?" Well, I'm going off to Transylvania to kill the werewolves. You two can't come. Well, we're going to come anyway. Well, all right. And then just cut to them in a car in Transylvania. So no B-roll to show that we're now going to an airport. No B-roll to show them, a plane, stock footage, nothing. Just straight cut, hard cut. We're now at Transylvania. Just head exploding dwarves, little strange hoteliers. It's, there's not a minute of this film that goes by where you don't get something that at least surprises you. It's heavily recommended in terms of being schlocky horror. It's total crap, but it's total crap of the highest order. I just wish that they'd given a little either more thought or less thought to Christopher Lee's scenes because he's trying to bring a dignity to it. And if he'd have rolled with it and just accepted that it was total crap, it might have been even funnier. Or if he'd played it even more straight, it might have been even more fun to watch the contrast. I don't know. Folks, I can't really talk much more about the Howling 2, Your Sister's a Werewolf. You just have to see it. You just have to experience it. Then you need to go and shower. Then you need to come back, think about your life choices, and then do something else. So yeah, that's our big one of the day is the Howling 2. Also for you horror hounds, Deathline from 1972, which stars Donald Pleasance in a wonderful performance. It's known as Raw Meat in the United States. So Raw Meat, oftentimes they did change the name for America, and most times they've changed it back now. But no, that is still known as Raw Meat. The 4K that just came out is called Raw Meat. So Deathline slash Raw Meat. Um, Essentially, a young couple find uh, the a local civil servant. Um, they find him on a staircase in the London Underground. They find him kind of slouched over. We know from the opening scene that he has tried to pick up a prostitute, but has been attacked by some kind of creature. But they don't know that. They assume he's just a drunk. They go to get a police officer and get some help. When they come back, the body is gone. So they report it, or the person's gone, the civil servant. They report it to the police, led by Donald Pleasance, who is such a bag of grumpy fun in this film. He's either being incredibly grumpy or ripping the piss out of everyone. He's impossibly sarcastic. He refuses to admit when he's made a mistake and just pretends that he'd never made that mistake and was always right in the first place. And he's shouting at absolutely everybody, but about the most mundane things about tea and uh, the licensing laws of British pubs and the fisheries mileage for the common market. Just all sorts, all sorts. He's having an absolute blast in this film, you can tell. It's directed by Gary Sherman, who'd gone to Poltergeist 3. The young couple essentially become our kind of protagonists as they continue to wonder what happened to that man that they met in the London Underground. But really, Donald Pleasance starts to come to the fore, but he's not a protagonist because he doesn't make things happen. He just waits for things to happen. And we start to meet um, our they're not villains, are they? We're told by one of Donald Pleasance's police team, Rossington, played by Clive Swift, that uh, about 100 years ago in the London Underground there was a cave-in, and theoretically people could have survived that because there's plenty of water down there, and if they ate rats and things, they might have lived for a while, and could always have eaten each other once they started to die off, I suppose. Well, wouldn't you know? Of course, that's the solution, and there's been generations of cannibals living in the London Underground for 100 years. So essentially, this film is one big satire on the working conditions of London Underground workers. It's Mick Lynch, the movie. No, I don't think we can quite sell it as being an intentional parody of political events of the 21st century. But a lot of people think this is a brilliant film. For me, and we'll get into Christopher Lee's involvement because it's very short, so I'm not going to spend much time on that. For me, the issue with the film is you want to show that this race, you want to create a contrast where the humans are quite vacant in the case of the young couple, quite vacuous and quite self-absorbed, or they're just nasty people in the case of what should be a protector of the people, Donald Pleasance. So you contrast that with the cannibals who they're only doing what nature tells them. They're only picking off the odd person to eat because they're doing it to survive, and they're whatever falls their way they'll take kind of thing. So they're not doing it to be bad. They're not doing it to be evil. All the badness and evil in this film comes from quote unquote the good people. The man is the kind of main cannibal in it, played by Hugh Armstrong, in a wonderful physical performance. And he lends a lot of humanity to it, and I don't want to hype it up too much, but in the way that Boris Karloff could for a silent role, or Lon Chaney Sr., he lends that kind of emotion to a silent, mostly performance, where you can tell what he's thinking at all times, even without words. It's a remarkable performance. However, I do think the film focuses on him a little too much in the middle and towards the end. I don't think they had enough plot to cover the runtime. So what starts out as, well, this is good. We're getting to spend time with the cannibals and set up their culture and just see their environment, starts to turn into, oh, so we're getting another long lingering dolly shot of the cannibals later, are we? It's four now, but who's counting? Starts to turn into padding. And yeah, lets me down massively. I hate the score for the film. It's awful early electronic music, which sounds like the kind of really cringy scores you would get for a Commodore 64 game. I think it was Will Malone who did the score, although I think there was two people credited, so maybe it was the other person doing the electronic parts. The score is terrible, absolutely terrible. It is an excellent film. It is an excellent film, but I think to get to the feature length mark, it could have gone through another draft where maybe they beef up something to do with the young couple because they're very underwritten, or maybe they beef up Donald Pleasance's role in looking into the case and blah blah blah, or maybe they beef up the role of Christopher Lee. He's got one scene in it, and he essentially is MI5, and he's wonderful in his extended cameo, really. Donald Pleasance, as mentioned, is the copper investigating the disappearances, and he's treating it as a missing persons case. But Christopher Lee just appears on the scene at the home of the civil servant when Pleasance is there with his assistant, just appears out of nowhere and just takes control of the situation in the snootiest and most upper class way possible, being entirely dismissive of Donald Pleasance for being a normal copper and not MI5, for being working class. And Christopher's literally wearing a bowler hat and has an umbrella. He's having a ball with it. He wanted to work with Donald Pleasance, so he took the role, even though it was one scene just for that, to work with Donald Pleasance again. However, they couldn't appear on screen at the same time together, apart from one small part of them sitting on the couch, because the height difference was too much. Donald Pleasance was 5'7", I think, and Christopher Lee was 6'4". So the height difference meant that the staging of the camera was too much. It wouldn't work at all. So they didn't actually get to do much together at all. If you'd maybe beef up the Christopher Lee part to, maybe MI5 have got knowledge of what's happening in the underground and are they covering something up? Blah 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 blah. Something. Because there's just too much of the film that is just extending those lingering shots of the undergrounds and the crypt essentially that's been kept, and to illustrate that society abides even in the worst of circumstances, but also to ask this age-old question in a lot of films and novels and whatnot of who are the monsters really? Um, well, it's them. They're the cannibals. We might be pricks, but they're still the monsters. Come on, come on. Who are the monsters really? It's not always mankind like they'd like you to believe in the Twilight Zone. Sometimes, no, the monsters are the monsters. But no, I mean they have uh, their own way of treating the dead, and there's mourning that we see when one of the cannibals dies. We see the other cannibal mourning. But it just goes on for way too long. Those scenes just way too long. However, recommended for Donald Pleasance's performance. I think he steals the show. Don't hold your breath for Pleasant win next year, but I do like Donald Pleasance quite a bit. And this is one of his best roles. We'll batter through with the next two because they're not horror films at all. But this is a delighted film. Hannie Caulder from 1971, starring Raquel Welch. So that's the titular Hannie Caulder. Right. This is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. When you think of westerns, you don't really think of many British westerns, do you? However, this is indeed that. Directed by Burt Kennedy, who wrote a lot of the Randolph Scott, Bud Boddicker, Renown cycle, and starring Raquel Welch, and then with Robert Culp from I Spy and some of the best episodes of Columbo and blah blah blah. And then with a threesome of favorites from various American westerns as the villains of the piece. Jack Elam, Strother Martin, and Ernest Borgnine as the kind of big bad. So plot, those three, Borgnine, Martin, and Elam, they play three brothers, the Clemens gang. They hold up a bank and escape with the money. Uh, they get away, take see this little farmland property. They think, well, we'll go in there and rest up for the night. They realize it's inhabited, so they kill the guy that owns it, and they find his wife inside. That's Raquel Welch. They rape her, and they burn the house down, leaving her for dead. So she's not dead, of course, because it would be a rather short film if she was. She escapes the ruins of the house and just walking across desert. It's filmed in Almeida, in Spain, like a lot of great spaghetti westerns. Unfortunately, it wasn't filmed in like Bristol or something. As a British western, maybe it should have been. But she walks across the desert and stumbles across Robert Culp, who's a bounty hunter, and he doesn't want to take her in at first, but feels sorry for her enough to give her water and whatnot, but gradually takes a liking to her, and he's not looking to take advantage of her in any way, which at this point just feels like relief for her. So she starts to beg, look, train me to be as good as you, because she sees him working his skills so that I can kill the Clemens gang for raping me and killing my husband. He keeps saying no, 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 but eventually gives in. Robert Culp takes Hannie Caulder to a gunsmith played by Christopher Lee, who looks brilliant in this, with a slight beard coming through and was kind of sweaty, but with a shirt on top. He looks exactly like the kind of character you would see in a spaghetti western. His accent's all over the place. I don't care. I don't care. Because it's just such a delight to see him in a bloody western. And he's not playing, the English gentleman. He's playing a kind of, is he supposed to be Mexican? No, because they say that he's now living in Mexico with his wife and he doesn't mind Mexicans. Well, he can't be Mexican then, but so he's presumably American, but it'd be so easy to imagine that he should play the English gent, like Richard Harris in Unforgiven or something. But no, they've given him a very American-like part, which I really appreciate. And all the training montage that happens there is brilliant. Robert Culp comes up with all sorts of ways to train Hannie, and she kind of has her rocky training montage throughout that whole segment of the film with Christopher and his family. It is wonderful. It's a fantastic scene, or a few scenes because it goes on for quite a while. And then they go back to hunting down the brothers, and I won't go into the plot from there because this film is still underseen. Um, Wonderful stuff. What a great, great film this is. My only issue is that I don't think the film needs Hannie Caulder to be raped at the start. There's that awful thing of uh, until relatively recently, rape scenes counting as titillation for film producers. Mm, that doesn't hold up too well. I mean, she could surely have maybe been out. Maybe she's gone to town and she comes back and finds, sees the brothers running away, just raiding off after having, killed her husband and staying the night, blah, blah, blah. She doesn't need to be there herself to be raped. That's a bit too much, especially when the rest of the film has not a light tone, but a good adventurous tone, and a kind of fun way about it and an exciting way about it. Um, Plus, yeah, Ernest Borgnine, Strother Martin, Jack Elam, yeah, they've played bad bastards before, but I don't like them as rapists this late because they're kind of beloved Western icons at this point, and to have them do that and then perform comedy parts later in the film. But apart from that, that's my only note. I love everything else about this film. I absolutely adore everything else, including having Diana Dors showing up as the madam of a brothel. I mean, what brilliant casting in 71 to have Diana Dors as the brothel keeper, as a madam. That is fantastic. And she's only got a few lines pretty much, but brilliant stuff. This is a brilliant Western. It falls somewhere in the middle. Is it classic Western? No, it's too revisionist for that. Is it a spaghetti Western? Well, it's filmed in Almeida, but no, it's too the tones are too classic for that. But it's a progressive Western and it's an interesting Western and it's a brilliantly shot Western. There's some lovely scenes where we see down the barrel of a gun like the start of a Bond film. There's some lovely cinematography from the great Edward Scaife. Burt Kennedy's direction, even though he's more noted as a writer, is on point. It's absolutely fantastic. I love the film to bits. Highly recommended. And Robert Culp is one of the coolest characters in a film, one of the absolute coolest. There's a character in it who kind of sets up that maybe there's going to be a sequel, but it doesn't really happen, unfortunately. Obviously, Stephen Boyd plays the preacher, um, although because I don't need to go into it too much, but you could also read his character as maybe the personification of death. Because we didn't get that sequel to just set him up as anything else, you can now bring uh, your own ideas. I think the personification of death works quite well. That he only shows up at certain points where that works. Yeah, brilliant, brilliant film. Highly recommended. Hannie Caulder, if you're looking for an offbeat Western, then look no further. So yeah, again, Christopher Lee in a Western, it's just not the kind of thing you expect. And, no. Last for today, Bear Island with Donald Sutherland. I mean, everybody's in this. Donald Sutherland, Vanessa Redgrave, Richard Widmark, Barbara Perkins, Lloyd Bridges, based on a novel by Alistair MacLean of Guns of Navarone, Force 10 from Navarone, that one with the submarine under the North Pole where the Russians are. What's the name of that one? The one with Rock Hudson. Anyway, Alistair MacLean, all sorts of adventure classics under his bonnet. This one, pretty standard stuff. Bunch of scientists go to the Bear Island, which is up somewhere near the North Pole, up beyond Norway, and they're looking for ways to study climate change. Very quickly into the film, one character who's going to join the party is killed, and we see that it was murder. It wasn't just, avalanche or something. So we're in very familiar Alistair MacLean territory already. Um, our characters get to Bear Island, the small and offbeat, savage, desolate white land. And when they get there, they see the ghosts of World War II, essentially, as they see where Germany had U-boats and things stationed. Donald Sutherland seems somewhat haunted by that. Other crew members seem to kind of distance themselves from that because it's an international crew and some of them are German, so maybe if they get a connection to the war that they're ashamed of, and Lloyd Bridges is just a happy-go-lucky guy taking it all in his stride. Um, in terms of spoilers for this film, I don't need to hold too much back, because it's nothing in here will shock you. But it all happens exactly the way you think things are going to go. So Donald Sutherland's here to get closure on his father, who was a German, being a U-boat captain who uh, killed all sorts of people, blah blah blah. But Donald Sutherland's been brought up to believe his father was actually a hero. So Donald Sutherland's there re to regain the hope that his father was actually one of the nice Germans, one of the nice Nazis. Okay. But the rest of the film falls into Alistair MacLean's typical trap of instead of concentrating on what could be a good solid modern adventure, deciding to fall back on, hey, but what remember World War II? That was something, wasn't it? So the Germans in it, if you want to know who the saboteurs are and who's bad in it, it's all the Germans. Even though this is set in contemporary 1979. And they're the suspects from the very start. So there's nothing clever about it. There's absolutely nothing clever about what's going on here and who's sabotaging, looking for water, who's sabotaging the radio towers to get trapped on the island. This is quite a popular film, and I don't understand why, because performances are good and the set pieces are good, but the plotting is just so childish that oh, who should we blame for all this? It's 1979. Well, it must be the Germans because that's what they're like. It's very, very childish, very, very facile. If they'd come up with just if McLean had come up with just a way to twist it. Maybe it's the Polish people and they're actually Germans, and they're the have Cossacks in it like GoldenEye did or something, and then just put a twist on it. Maybe it's the American guys on the ship and they've got some kind of ulterior motive. But no, being Alistair MacLean, there has to be a secret cache of gold and there has to be people undercover, but they're not really undercover. They are what you thought they were all along, and blah 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 blah. None of the parts are particularly interesting here. Again, Donald Sutherland is trying to find signs that his father was a nice Nazi, which I mean, we can have discussions. I'm not sure this video is the place for it, but we were just following orders and all that. But essentially, I don't think the world really cared if you were one of the nice Nazis in 1979 or not. There's one character who is also in it, uh, and is indeed a bad guy, if you will. But he's only just there to be one slight surprise turn because he's in it for the money, so he's helping the Germans. But it's not even a twist. It'd be disrespectful to twist to call it one, because it just isn't. It's just a development. It's a thing. What happened? Um, I don't know. I just don't think this film. I mean, I'd never seen it before, and a lot of people had told me, "Oh, this is one of the ones you'll like." Christopher Lee's not in it much for your purposes, but I think you'll really like the film anyway. And I just don't see it. I just don't see it. I mean, I like what Donald Sutherland's doing. It's peak era for Donald Sutherland, but and perhaps it's worth it for Vanessa Redgrave's Norwegian accent, where she thinks they talk like these. So, what's that? What's she doing? But apart from that, no, there's really nothing to commend this film. Christopher Lee plays the one Pole in the group who every night goes off from their little base camp on Bear Island and does something and puts himself up for suspicion. And again, one character does think that he might be up to no good, even though he's a Pole. So he's definitely not German, he's a Pole. So maybe he is a secret German. Don't have your character suggest the more interesting twists than the eventual reveals at the end of the film when we turn out the twist is there is no twist and everything is that stupid all along anyway. No, didn't care for this one at all. Don Sharp directed it. His direction's fine, and we love Don Sharp. If you remember last HaLEEween, he directed The Devil Ship Pirates and Rasputin, and I mean, he did the Fu Manchu films with Christopher Lee, the early ones, the best ones. But yeah, not recommended. See it if it's on TV on a Sunday afternoon and forget it. So see it and forget it. You'll never forget it, even if you try. See it for Donald Pleasance. There's some interesting ideas, but it just needed a little bit more plot to sustain 90 minutes. And absolutely see it and see if you agree with me that the rape scene brings it down a few notches and brings an uncomfortable tone to what should be much more exciting and interesting affairs. Yeah, yeah. See if you agree with that. Well, whew, there we go. Another four down, and we're pretty much halfway through HaLEEween now. Our next one's oh, haven't really decided yet. What should we have? Torture Chamber of Dr. Sadism, The Curse 3. I don't know. Try and throw in again a raison d'etre of this. Try and throw in a couple of horror things because again it's HaLEEween and Christopher Lee, so people want some horror, and then throw in a few more offbeat things like an adventure film like the Bear Island, although adventuring quotation marks, and a western like Hannie Caulder. So prepare on Sunday probably for a couple of offbeat picks, a couple of slightly more, well, that's the kind of thing Chris would do, isn't it? Picks, but regardless, hopefully some interesting ones. I'll see you then, folks. Thanks very much, and bye.